Okay, I'm going to start by introducing you guys, so you join me, and then I hope the seat arrives as soon as possible. All right, so this session we are going to talk about how internet shutdowns enable authorities to evade accountability, and we'll be looking at some case studies from across Africa and the Middle East. We put together a report my name is Felicia Antonio, Keep It On campaign manager at Access Now. And so together with Global Partners Digital, we put together this report highlighting some case studies from a number of countries. And today we'll be talking about how internet shutdowns allow governments to perpetrate these violations with impunity. And this include serious crimes against people, including extrajudicial killings, brutalities against protesters, and shutdowns has also enabled some governments to hold on to power. So without further ado, I would like to call my panelists to join me. So I would start with Sandra Iseng, Executive Director of Women of Uganda, to join me here. And thank you for agreeing to speak on the panel. Kemal Afanyong, Regional Coordinator for West Africa International Sans Frontières. Jacqueline Rowe, Policy Lead, Global Partners Digital. Bridget, you would stand. James Merchant, James is Program Manager at FinTech Fund, TF, as we all call it. And then Bridget Andere, Africa Policy Analyst at Access Now. Jacqueline was very kind enough to. All right, so first of all, since this was a research that we put together, I would like to start with Jacqueline, who is the lead author of this research, to highlight some of the findings that we saw in this report and maybe set the conversation for today's discussion. So over to you.
Great, thank you, Felicia, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Felicia's hinted at the topic, and you've all seen the session description, but what I'll try and do with my opening remarks is just set the scene, tell you a little bit about the research paper that we jointly produced with the generous support of Meta's Africa, Middle East and Turkey team. And so I'll just tell you about why we did the research, what we looked at, a little bit about some of the case studies that we did as part of the research methodology, and then draw out some of the key findings that were included in the paper, and which I hope then our wonderful panelists will pick up on and develop further throughout the discussion. So firstly, how and why did we choose to do this research? In discussions with the Meta team, we decided that we wanted to do a research output which draws attention not only to the impacts of internet shutdowns on freedom of expression, but also highlighting how internet shutdowns interface with a range of other human rights issues, and particularly serious human rights abuses by state or government actors. So in this research, we were really interested in situations where the internet shutdown is imposed amid a context of suppression of political protest, silencing of dissent, police brutality, extrajudicial killings, and even in some of the case studies we looked at to cover up evidence of war crimes or crimes against humanity. So to investigate this issue in this region, we first conducted a kind of an initial mapping of all of the internet shutdowns that have taken place across Africa and the Middle East between 2016 and 2022 that have occurred or co-occurred alongside these types of human rights violations in the region. And doing that research, we relied really heavily on the excellent work that's already been done by organizations like Access Now, Internet Society, Freedom House, lots of other organizations working to document internet shutdowns as they happen and to raise awareness of those incidents. So from that initial mapping, we found 54 such incidents, and from that mapping we selected 5 country case studies that we wanted to really do a deep dive into what happened in that situation, what was the political context, what was the drivers, who was involved, which telecommunications companies complied. So really to try and paint a more illustrative picture of how this issue plays out in practice. And so those 5 case studies, which I won't go into loads of detail now, but we can address them in the questions, or you can read more about them in the research paper itself. But those 5 case studies included Burkina Faso in January of 2022, when an internet shutdown was imposed just after a military coup d'etat. Chad in February 2021, when an internet shutdown was imposed just after there was an attempted arrest of an opposition politician, which resulted in at least 2 members of his family being killed. And then the internet shutdown was imposed to kind of cover up what happened in that incident. The third case study was Sudan in 2021, in October and November, when again, after a military coup d'etat, then over 100 protesters, or people, including children, according to reports by local medical organizations, over 100 people were killed during these protests, and the shutdown again served to obscure those violations of people's human rights. The fourth one was Iran last autumn. I think it's maybe one of the more recent examples that lots of people will be familiar with, but where the internet shutdown covered up the reactions and brutality towards protesters after the tragic killing of Mahsa Amini by the police. And the fifth and final one, one of the longest standing internet shutdowns in the world, and covering up really severe war crimes and genocide, is the ongoing shutdown in Tigray in Ethiopia, which again I'm sure we'll come back to maybe in some of the discussions in more detail. So this is what we did through the research. We did these kind of deep dive forays into what happened in each of those contexts, who the victims were, how the situation played out, and we were really lucky to have input and advice from local researchers in each of those contexts, like Kemal here, who is a very important contributor to the research. And we hope that kind of combining that qualitative investigation alongside the quantitative mapping and kind of statistics helps to paint a fuller picture of how this trend is playing out in practice. Before I hand on to the next panelist, I just want to summarize some of the kind of 5 common factors that we identified across all of those case studies and some of the other incidents that we looked at. Kind of these 5 factors we see as kind of drivers of the use of internet shutdowns in this way. The first one is a long-standing history of state control over information ecosystems more broadly. So yes, we're talking about internet shutdowns, and that's a slightly new phenomenon in the sense that the internet is within the last decade or 2, but actually the problem way preceded that in terms of state control over press, over media, over civic spaces more broadly. And so states that have this long history of an autocratic government intervening in information ecosystems is much more likely then to shut down the internet to control the narrative in this way. The second and third factors were an enabling regulatory environment and an enabling infrastructural environment. So where a state has laws or policies in place which allow it to legally shut down the internet in the interests of national security or kind of other loosely defined reasons, or where the state has kind of a monopoly over telecommunications infrastructure, it's much easier, there's much less barriers to the state then implementing a shutdown as it wishes. The fourth factor was an existing history of internet shutdowns, and that's something that Felicia has spoken about a lot before, that once a state has flipped the kill switch, it's very tempting to do so again multiple times. And finally, very obvious one, but the presence of political instability or conflict, that in the vast majority of cases these shutdowns take place where there's already very contested narratives, kind of conflict between different political groups or different groups within the country. So those were kind of 5 factors. I think we're all very familiar with those and kind of maybe have made those observations already, but we were really trying to hit home yes, some of the commonalities across some of the situations that we looked at. So I'll leave it there, and back to you, Felicia.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for setting the stage. Kemal, as one of the contributors to this research, could you speak to how the government of Chad has deployed internet shutdowns during political situations? And in responding to that, could you also highlight the impacts of these shutdowns on, be it elections, or how has it enabled authorities to perpetuate human rights abuses?
Thank you, Felicia, for the question. So first, I will start with the strategy, the way the government is proceeding by shutting down internet in Chad. So, as mentioned by Jacqueline, Chad has a long-running history of information controls. But what we are observing now is that the government is trying to proceed with specific shutdown in area. So basically, that's what they're doing now. So we notice that they are blocking internet or denying access to specific website as well. And in order to proceed likewise, we got the information that the government acquired recently. I mean, 2014, they were able to buy a bunch of technology tools and also cartography tools that they are currently using to proceed. So basically, we noticed this year, for example, that those specific shutdowns were happening in Chad, and it's like a big. So this is actually the big change between the way the government was proceeding before, because when there were political instability, like clashes with other politicians, or mass protests, the government were very quick to give orders to the telecom operators in Chad, and then they were shutting down as quick as and as simple the network. Yeah, so that's the main change that we noticed actually. And I will also talk. So as you mentioned, I will talk about the impact of such shutdown on the population. So basically, on political processes, those shutdowns prevent citizens to exert their right. So basically, when there's a shutdown, you cannot communicate, so you cannot express your feelings. For example, in 2018, I was observing the election in DRC, so Democratic Republic of Congo, and just before the election, we noticed that the government the government gave orders to the telecom operators once again, and then they were able to limit the circulations of videos and images. So basically, the population were not able to share information, to keep them informed about what was going in the country, and that's how you get your rights are penalized actually, because you cannot express yourself. And also, I would say that the other point that I would like to mention is on the technical side, when you have a country who's proceeding likewise, it goes beyond the borders, because I'm coming from Benin, for example, and because we are connected to the sea, the ocean Atlantic, we are used. The infrastructure in Benin is used as a connecting point. So basically, you have many countries who are depending on this infrastructure, and when you cut the access, you penalize them also, and then you have the impact on the social impact, the economic also impact, because you have a lot of loss. And in my opinion, and in the opinion of many observers, African countries cannot lose such amount of money during the period of shutdowns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, aside the human implications of internet shutdowns, we've seen the impacts on economies as well. And you mentioned how the Chad government would restrict circulation of certain messaging. I think there was an example in Tanzania in 2020, prior to the elections. The government quickly introduced a law that somehow penalized the use of circumvention tools, and then during elections they shut down the internet and also restricted certain messaging, like the names of the political opposition from being sent via text. So we've seen that in the region as well. Okay, Sandra, we all know that internet shutdowns are bad and terrible. Could you highlight how these shutdowns further widen the gender-digital divide? And then if you have some impact stories from Uganda that you want to highlight with regards to how internet shutdowns affected women in the country, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicia, for the question. Hi, everyone. Hi. Let's smile a bit. Okay, so talking about the internet shutdown situation in Uganda, first of all, I think hinting more a little bit about the history of internet shutdown in Uganda. It started in 26. It started as a form of blockage of different websites such as Daily Monitor, and then there was Radio Katwe, and then we also had one in 2011. It was about blockage of specific SMS that had specific words. And then we had one in 2016, and this happened twice, and it was blockage of mobile money and then the social media platform. So these were really blockage. But in the 2021 general election, it was different because it was an outrage. We faced an internet, could we say kill switch, whereby we could not access the internet even if you have VPN. But thanks to Access Now for always being there to check out different human rights defenders around the world to see how they're doing during internet shutdowns. So speaking about how internet shutdowns impact women, of course internet shutdowns affect everyone, but we already have specific groups that are marginalized by various reasons. For example, for the case of women, we have issues such as the gender digital divide, and we have the issue of privacy, surveillance, and all that. So when the internet is shut down, then it's like a double sword, you know? They are facing more challenges. And internet shutdown experienced by women is not the same in different aspects of Uganda from the research that we conducted. When you look at the urban, the rural, the peri-urban, the experiences of women is very different because we have the aspect of the gender digital divide. Access to the internet in the urban is not the same as access to the internet in the rural areas, whereas the woman in the urban might really know that, oh, the internet has been shut down, I'm not able to communicate to family. It's different for the woman in the urban area. So I will just highlight a few stories that, and you will allow me to read them because I don't want to misquote. So we had interactions with different groups, persons with disability, the LGBTI community, the women's human rights defenders, and seeing the stories that we got from specifically a female person with disability, she said, I had limited access to information during internet shutdowns because I have hearing impairment, and that hinder depending on the call or the radio to receive information. Therefore, social media is the most effective platform to access information as a person with hearing impairment. So when the internet is shut down, it's different. Someone might be physically disabled, but when they have access to the internet, they're able to do online transaction, access business, access to, let's say, education and all that. But it becomes different when the internet is shut down. And I would like to read a story from a female 33-year-old grand seller at Nakawa Market in Kampala City, who said that one of the worst our trade collapsed due to the 5 days intentional internet outrage in Uganda. So Susan's business came to an end because she was trying to operate her business using the mobile app. And when the internet was shut down, she lost about 300,000 Ugandan shillings. That's about 81 USD. So this might be very small for some of us here, but for such a woman, it's rent for her, it's food for our family. So we can see that how internet shutdowns can affect different groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much for highlighting the impacts. James, I want to come to you. You've done so much work when it comes to internet shutdowns, and you continue to support the community with resources and tools, which is very important for us to keep pushing back. So could you tell us how OTF is prioritizing the issue of internet shutdowns? For example, you have the Internet Freedom Fund, or the Shutdown Get Down project, which is my favorite. So yeah, could you highlight how you support us under these projects?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Felicia. Thanks to you and the team, and to Jackie and the GPD team as well for putting together this really great report as well. We always really need to see more and more case studies to understand why governments are choosing more and more to impose internet shutdowns, but also how they're doing it, like kind of marrying some of this political context to the actual implementation is just so important. And as Jackie was saying, like internet shutdowns often come paired with really terrible human rights violations. Their intent is to prevent people doing human rights documentation work, sharing it with global media, to prevent media organizations from being able to operate, prevent legitimate political opposition and protesters being able to organize. And so yeah, they throw up really incredible challenges for civil society. And so, yeah, OTF tries to position itself to help build tools and practices that can support these kinds of at-risk users. I guess taking a slightly different tack from advocacy, like we're a funder, but we don't support advocacy initiatives. Our core mission is to support the development, research, maintenance, and implementation of tools and technologies to counter censorship, online censorship, and surveillance around the world. And the main mechanism we have for this is the Internet Freedom Fund. So our work to counter shutdowns in particular can fall under a few different strands in this fund. First off, we've been, over the course of the last 5-6 years, been investing in a really wide range of different circumvention technologies, because we understand that information controls, internet shutdowns look so different in every context. Every country has a different infrastructural setup, legislative kind of set of variables, different needs from different kinds of communities, different connectivity, and so no tech solution, also we hate using that term, but no tech mitigation for internet shutdowns is going to be as effective in country A versus country B. And so yeah, the variety of things we've supported has included development of VPNs, large and small, which are responsible for keeping millions of people around the world able to access filtered content, filtered platforms. But yeah, we are seeing more internet blackouts. It's not just a case of content censorship these days, right? It's full network blackouts. And so we've also been investing in more experimental technologies, so peer-to-peer based messenger services like Briar that work over Bluetooth. So if you are in a large crowd, like in a protest situation or a similar kind of situation, you're able to communicate securely with your contacts around you. We've supported other kinds of peer-to-peer distributed content distribution tools, Unode, the Sino browser, which kind of function in a similar way to BitTorrent, so you can source content from other folks with those tools. And yeah, like and also I think it's really important to support technology development rooted in the communities that technologists are trying to serve. So we've seen really interesting projects coming out of the continent looking at SMS encryption, coming out from technologists in Cameroon, in Sudan, that have grown out of their specific experiences in those shutdowns, and them noticing that, hey, actually, when the internet's out, SMS networks are sometimes up. And so how can we allow people to send tweets over SMS infrastructure? How can we make SMS more secure as a last resort? So yeah, just ensuring, I think it's a priority of OTFs to ensure that the technology development really is rooted in the communities that folks are trying to serve. And when that's not the case, just ensuring that there's a constant conversations between technology developers and frontline civil society organizations, human rights defenders, making sure that there's really sound body of user research, making sure that tools are localized effectively for the communities that are actually intending to use them. And also that from a design perspective, these technologies are designed with the kind of expectations of at-risk communities in mind. So we support that technology development work through the Internet Freedom Fund. We also support that research work through the Internet Freedom Fund, and also through we support digital security work, so supporting organizations doing digital security capacity building on the front line, who are doing some testing of some of these technologies and trying to roll out some of these shutdown resilience technologies to the organizations that could benefit from them. And yeah, just ensuring that there's this constant feedback loop between technology developers and the communities that they're trying to serve. And then this kind of manifested a bit last year when we organized this shutdown get down event, which Felicia was kind enough to join for. But yeah, bringing together, again, different technology developers, different researchers, digital security experts from places that are experiencing internet shutdowns, and just making sure that there's a full coordination between all of these players. And also, just a final note, we also are super engaged in supporting network measurement projects. Like, we think it's super important to support that documentation work, to understand how filtering is imposed, how shutdowns are imposed. So I see Uni in the room. Hi. But yeah, we also think that's a really important pillar of work to support. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for providing some kind of hope. I heard Sandra say smile, and I'm like, anytime I'm being interviewed on shutdowns and the journalist is like, oh, we want you to be free and speak, is like, and I'm like, I'm not talking about the things I'm talking about. I can't smile. It's internet shutdowns, human rights abuses, and all that. So understand if the room is gloomy, but okay, Bridget, I want to come to you. Access Now launched the Keep It On campaign in 2016, and since then we've been pushing back against internet shutdowns. So could you highlight some of the successes of the campaign, and maybe you can change the mood of the room a bit with some great stories. So over to you.
Thanks, Felicia. And absolutely, I think when Sandra said to smile, everyone was a little bit, you know, oh, we weren't smiling. And it's a gloomy issue, as Felicia has said. But through the years and just being in this campaign, the Keep It On campaign is Access Now, we've learned a lot from, I wouldn't say failures, but we've learned a lot from where we've fallen short sometimes. And that has informed our campaigns now and our campaigns in the future. And that's something that we're really committed to continue to learn. So some of the successful approaches that we've taken on, for instance, with the Keep It On campaign, because sometimes, or rather what we have realized is that there are certain moments in which we can predict that there might be a shutdown. We don't like to say that there will definitely be a shutdown in a certain country, but there are always signs. And especially when you come closer to the continent, or just generally in some areas in the global majority, political events, elections, protests, whenever we can see them coming from, you know, a couple of days, weeks before, we know to start to prepare. So for instance, right now we have the Election Watch campaign, which the KIO has running this year, and even will have running next year because of the number of elections that are going on in the region right now, and even globally. Whenever there's a run-up to an election, we will start to engage with stakeholders. Now, who are these stakeholders? Everybody in this room is a stakeholder. That's one thing we have to realize. Stakeholders are citizens, they are civil society members, they are governments, they are telcos and private companies, social media platforms, and we start to engage with these people as soon as we can, as early as you can. I can give you the example, for instance, of Kenya. Last year, we ran a pretty long campaign for a couple of months in advance, and I can see some of the people that we worked with on that campaign in the room, and it was really interesting, and because most of the time we will send an open letter to the government and then try to follow up with government, but we realized that there was a gap and a need to engage a little bit more intentionally with the public and go out there and spread that awareness, because one of the things that we're hearing more and more of is that in certain countries, especially even in Ethiopia is where we heard of this example specifically, where there have been shutdowns, is that people think a shutdown is simply shutting off social media. You know, people don't really understand the magnitude of a full-on blackout, or even if it is a social media platform shutdown, just how much of an impact it does have on people, on, you know, SMPs, on people who learn online, especially coming from a COVID period. So much was moved online, and then you see shutdowns still happening, and you wonder how people are supposed to access information, how people are supposed to access education. So getting this information out to the public as early as possible is really is something that we're more intentional about now, and also localizing and contextualizing those things. And we work, for instance, in Kenya with Localization Lab to get out you know, content in Swahili, to get out content in some local languages so that people understand a little bit better. When it comes to our open letters that we send to the government, we will send it and then we will follow up with governments to make sure that they've actually seen it, that they understand the effect of shutdowns. One of the justifications that we hear most of the time when it comes to shutting down the internet is disinformation, hate speech, fake news. So what are we doing then to combat that? Because they always say, civil society, but there's the very real problem that is fake news or disinformation. Now we're, you know, amping up our efforts and giving actionable recommendations, not just to governments, but also to social media companies. For instance, we launched late last year a declaration on content governance in times of crisis. That's a tool that can be used. It's adaptable to any situation. It's not country specific. And then, you know, just making sure that these things that we're putting out are digestible so that people know their rights and then they can fight for them and know that they're informed. Other than that, we have had a bit more of an effort in holding governments and government officials accountable. In Kenya, for instance, we had a couple of commitments last year from government officials saying we are not going to shut down the internet. So whenever they make such statements, and of course they're made publicly,
It is then up to us to say, we have heard what you have said, and we are going to keep you accountable. We are watching. And that has been pretty, pretty good for us, that they know that we're watching them and we're listening, and that if they go, against what they said, we're going to call them out on it. So the naming and shaming has always been a big part of the KIO campaign. And now we were laughing about it with Felicia, I think, months ago. It was a shutdown. I think it was it in Chad? And even before we said anything, the government was very quick to say, it is not us. We have not shut down the internet. There's a cable cut. Come on, guys, it's not us. And so it was a little bit funny, but it's such a good thing. It speaks to how much this campaign has grown, that now people know that even just not just the Keep It On campaign, but even their citizens will hold them accountable. People know their rights. And the narrative shifting that Sandra mentioned has also been extremely important, telling the stories of people who are affected by shutdowns, so that people understand that it's not just simply, I'm not going to be able to access my Facebook and post something funny or share something interesting. It's impacting people's lives every day, their businesses, their ability to learn, their ability to access information, the chilling effect that it has on freedom of expression. These are the things that we're trying to highlight with the stories that we have, and humanizing those stories, so that people that don't necessarily understand the technical aspects of shutdowns at least will understand the human aspect of it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I want to check the room to see if there are comments or questions. Okay, I see hands. All right, so we'll take questions, and then if there's more time, we can come back to discuss, or maybe for you to give your closing remarks. All right, can I see? Okay, so let's start with you. Please mention your name, your organization, and country if possible. And please stand up so that we see you. Thanks.
Okay. Good afternoon for everyone. My name is Dercio Tsanzana. I'm independent researcher on digital rights, and I come from Mozambique. And my question goes maybe for everyone. You can answer if you think that you can. It's about security for you, because we know that in this context where you are fighting against governments or people who don't respect human rights, democracy, freedom of expression, freedom of media, it's very difficult to do this kind of work, or maybe this kind of research which you did or you are still doing. So how do you secure yourself, your security? Because it's not, I imagine it's not easy. And for example, I was listening to Sandra when she said that she did interviews with women, people in the market, so in Uganda, and we know what it's Uganda today. So how do you secure yourself during this kind of work? Just to understand the strategy which you use, maybe maybe we can also adopt this kind of ideas. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon all. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. My name is Idris Mohammed. I'm a journalist and also an independent researcher from Nigeria. So I have comment and also question. I share your feelings when you are narrating your experience while I was in the field, because I was also a consultant with CDD, Center for Democracy and Development in Nigeria on internet shutdown. I'm also currently working with International Development Department, University of Birmingham, with Facebook, also assessing the taxonomy of internet shutdown in the northwest Nigeria. I recall in 2021, Nigerian government shut down internet across the communities of northwest region because of the insecurity. I opportunity to come from one of the community in Katsina State. I interviewed different stakeholders from the resident, the government officials, some of the telephony companies, journalists and even civil society groups that are advocating and promoting internet access. I don't know whether open access have something doing in Nigeria, especially that has to do with the internet shutdown. Because as I'm talking to you currently, there are many, over 200 communities cut across 3 states, Zamfara, Katsina, and Sokoto, still disconnected with the internet because of the insecurity. And part of the findings I found out from even the communities, despite the government keep telling us that they haven't shut down the internet, they suspended some access to the internet. That's the diplomatic way they're always saying that because of the misinformation and fake news, some people are pushing because of the insecurity. But still,
please, could you wrap up your question? Could you please wrap up your question or comment? Could you?
Yes, my question is what open access is doing in those communities, because I haven't come across some of their intervention. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's take.
We understood from our research we are connected to a satellite where even when the government shut down the internet, you can still communicate, which was still limited, but at least it's better than none. And then from our research, we realized that some private telcos were operating that most of the government officials were using. So that was what we banked on, created our own safe house during the presidential election, just in case there was a complete internet shutdown. Journalists and other human rights organizations can still have access to send information. So I think partners should definitely look into supporting CSOs when working with embassies and other donor communities in trying to get more safe houses in case of during elections, because governments will always make promises, but when they're at risk of losing elections, these are some of the things that they resort to, like shutting down the internet, talk about certain things like saying it's security issues. Like, for instance, in Senegal, nobody would have ever imagined such a bastion of democracy, they would be experiencing things like that. But now with these demonstrations happening there regarding the president's third term, it's happening slowly, and we don't know where we headed to with it. Thanks.
Thank you. Can we take it?
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Okay, my name is Joshua Patrick, the CEO of Mirai Ethics. Can everyone say it's not business as usual? Can everyone say it's not business as usual? The reason why I'm saying this, actually, threats are advancing. And so we should advance our thinking. And that is a call for design thinking. Why am I saying this? We don't want just to, after this, we say we spoke and left. Can we talk about action? Mirai Ethics is an organization where the government consults the citizenry, and citizen advises the government on issues of economic and planning, leveraging on behavioral science. So I'll give a case scenario. If I don't share this, then I think the whole point of internet shutdown will not be displayed. The reason why I'm saying that we just had a session, and we were discussing the issue of the Wikimedia about internet shutdown. Those are content, they were creating content for Pakistan. Then the government of Pakistan shut down because maybe the content that was being created was not favoring them. So the community around there actually advocate for the return of the Wikimedia. So another case study is that currently here in Kenya, we are one of the implementing partner of a program called Citizen Accountability Audit, CA, whereby citizens are being engaged to do audit work. So one of the, there is a key, is a multi-stakeholder. So what we are saying is this. A good example is that now the World Bank is investing 390 USD million to install 25,000 Wi-Fi hotspots in Kenya. So this is a case scenario whereby, for example, after this installation of these hotspots, after a period of maybe 3 months, then no one can actually trace whether this certain hotspot is active or not. You see the point? So because the issue of the corruption, for example, someone will be, because at the end of the day, there will be a maintenance cost.
Please, could you wrap up so we respond to the questions before we close? Thank you.
The point is, how do we support, for example, the internet? I was talking about action. Action is because there are key stakeholders here on internet advocacy. So the question is this. There's a project which is going to be installed. Here there's a citizen accountability audit which is supposed to support the citizen on issue of accountability. So we have to connect them through the internet. So the World Bank financed this. Kenya are the beneficiary of this. Then we have, for example, now stakeholders like us who will actually be doing the monitoring work, whether these actual hotspots are working or not. So how can we team up so that at the end of the day, there's something that will be achieved?
Thank you. Okay, let's take the last question, and then I will come back to you for your response.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isaac Amuku, and as we talk right now in the context of Uganda that Sandra shared, Meta is still closed or shut down in Uganda due to some misunderstanding between Meta as a company and the government of Uganda. In 2021, Meta closed several accounts for the NRM on allegations that those platforms were promoting fake news. And in response, what the government did was actually to shut down what? Facebook or Meta. And when you're in Uganda, you can't access it without a VPN. So my question is, we are seeing different forms of internet shutdown coming in, you know, blockages and all this happening. And my question is, what more can we actually do to ensure that the policymakers understand better the narratives between internet shutdown and human rights? Because we see it happening and there are yet others to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. I would like to... okay, can you ask your question in like 30 seconds so we can wrap up? Thanks.
Thanks, Felicia. My question really quickly is, I think we are already aware of the situation with internet shutdowns and disruptions in Iran and China. And we're also aware that we have certain countries on the continent that are friendly with those two countries. So my question to the panel is, what are you thinking of in terms of being proactive should those situations find themselves taking place on the continent? And what are your thoughts around that?
Okay, thank you. I would, maybe Bridget, you can highlight or respond to some of the questions. The one on Nigeria, Zamfara, yeah, you can respond to that and I can add on.
Yeah, I'd like to just address a couple of questions that have been asked. There was something asked about security issues and the Nigeria question and what more can we do has been asked. Around security issues, as human rights defenders, we are alive to the fact that whatever work you do, especially in our context, in the context of this region that we're based on. I am based in the Africa region, I'm based in Nairobi. I know that there are certain risks that doing the work that I do, will accrue to me. But we have to assess regularly. So that's something that we do for ourselves. We assess the security risks accruing to us, and we take action depending on what it is. Of course, unfortunately, sometimes it's completely, it's not something that's possible. It's completely impossible to avoid any risk. So you must just assess that risk, see how you can mitigate it. And if you cannot, I mean, we see human rights defenders being incarcerated all over the region every now and then. And so that's not, of course, something that's very attractive, but we mitigate to the extent that we can. And what we cannot do, we cannot do. And we hope for support from other actors, from other stakeholders, and just, kind of cross our fingers and hope for the best. But yes, we do take steps to make sure that we're remaining secure, whether it is digitally or personally or physically in our work. The question on access in Nigeria being suspended in some parts of Nigeria, we do work in Nigeria, and we did have a campaign around the elections specifically. Perhaps some of the things that you mentioned or some of the areas that you've mentioned are not things that we're alive to, but we're always happy to speak. And you can reach out to us. This is something that we make a very intentional effort towards. Involving the community, you can always write, whether to Access Now directly or to Felicia, to report any instance of a shutdown, and we can investigate it and take some action. So please feel free to reach out to us after this, and we can definitely have a conversation. With regard to what more we can do, there are several stakeholders, as we've all recognized in this room, that can take specific action. So, of course, as a civil society, we will continue to do the work that we're doing, advocating, raising awareness, talking to governments, engaging, making sure people have tools to help them in case of a platform shutdown or an internet shutdown, making sure people understand what an internet shutdown is and what is and what they can do. And I mean, someone here also has spoken about the tools that they're developing, even technically, to help people circumvent or, a total shutdown, tools like Briar, and, whether it's a VPN and measurement tools. Uni is here. We're super happy to have you in the room. Measurement is a very key aspect of fighting internet shutdowns, measurement and reporting. And so if we can do this, even the people in this room, if you notice a shutdown or an interruption, report it, document it, and then we go from there.
Thank you. Okay, Sandra, sorry to put you on the spot, but do you want to respond to the question with regards to the Wikimedia shutdown, since you are representing Wikimedia as well? So.
Okay, so I don't know if I got the question right, but again, Wikipedia is also on the internet, So when the internet is shut down, one is not able to also contribute or access information on Wikipedia. So do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, I think he was asking how to support or hold authorities accountable for instance, maybe World Bank has funded Kenya to build infrastructure on ICT or whatever. How do we ensure that this is actually done in the country also? Yeah.
Okay.
Did I get your question correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think already Bridget highlighted some of the what we can do. We have the Keep It On coalition where you can report issues in case you faced any internet shutdown. I'm not quite sure whether the Wikimedia as straight or direct, but we have the advocacy or the Wikimedia policy team that you can also let them know. I've heard of instances whereby Wikimedians have been attacked because of the information that they share online, and yet information that is documented on Wikimedia is really based on secondary sources. So there's been that challenge of attacks to different groups who contribute on Wikipedia. But the Wikipedia or Wikimedia Foundation has policies on privacy that you can reach out to, and if you want, I can put you in touch with some of the Wikimedia Foundation staff that are available here as well. So I also wanted to say something on security. Is that okay?
5 seconds.
So I understand that I struggle to pronounce your name, but is also one of the Global Voices contributors, and usually issues that mostly that around digital rights are really I think of threat to most of the authoritarian governments. I myself have received, especially when I was doing a lot of work on internet freedom, on warnings from the different friends, and that you should stop doing that, you know. So that is already a threat, but I would say there's nothing as absolute security. Security begins with us, and also if you're interviewing or interacting with the person, make sure that you care about that security. What are you doing or putting in place to ensure that the people you're talking to are also safe? Are you making their names anonymous? Are you trying to put some of the privacy policy in place to ensure that this community is safe? We've talked about VPN is also one of the
Thank you very much. We are at time, but Kamal, James, and Jacqueline, if you can, give your closing remarks in 10 seconds each. That would be great.
Okay, I will.
Okay, go.
I will use the time for the closing remark to answer the question from the Gambia. So basically, congratulations for the work done. I heard about the safe houses that were used to provide internet access to the people. You mentioned the case of Senegal with, a bastion of democracy who's now facing mass protest. The startup that I told about is actually using data from cartography in Senegal. So I think that it could be good to start a discussion with the government in order to see what kind of data is actually used and how we can, also push back in order to stop this. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give my 10 slightly long seconds. Also just +1 to Alu's point around just that it's a massive thing to be concerned about. I think particularly in the case of China, I think Iran's internet it took them like 25 years to build it, and it's crazy.
Watching, and that we are taking note of their actions in this respect, and maybe the other thing is also that there is a role for international pressure, and one thing that did come out of the Iran shutdown, for example, is that the Freedom Online Coalition changed their kind of fundamental charter so that they can provide country-specific statements, and so they made a statement on the Iran shutdown, and that so there is a place to push back and to hold up a more democratic vision of the internet, and I think that the international community has to continue with that work. And yeah, I agree with James on the Iran and China point. Iran's shutdown was incredibly complex, and the technologists in the room, I'm sure, know much more about that than I do. But yeah, those techniques and those tools are coming, and so in the same way that when you make a deep fake, then the technology to detect the deep fake, and then the deep fake gets better, and then the technology and then it's this. I think it's the same thing with internet shutdowns, right? Like the governments get more sophisticated, and we have to develop then new means of detecting them as well. So yeah, I agree with those 2 points, and thank you, Felicia, for keeping us to time.
Okay, thank you very much, and yeah. All right, I hope you enjoyed the session, and I just want to say that your security is very important. We are all doing important work, everyone in this room, but no advocacy is worth your life. And so please take the precautions and be safe in the work that you are doing. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of DRIF. Bye.
If you would like a photo session, you can have one here just before we start the next session. Thank you.